What's up guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Adriana Leek. If you're new here, I make videos about mom stuff, and today I want to talk to you guys about the pros and cons of breastfeeding. I breastfed my son and still am breastfeeding. He's going to be 2 next week, and at the end I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what we're going to do different next time, or if we're going to do anything different, so make sure you guys stick around till the end. Okay, let's go ahead and jump right into the pros. The very first pro that you just cannot ignore is that breastfeeding is way cheaper. If you are a mom to be, I would encourage you to look up the prices of formula. It is outrageous what a little canister of formula costs. That goes along with the bottles and the cleaning stuff that you have to have for the bottles and the time and all of that. It's way cheaper, way easier to breastfeed. Another pro is that it's way more convenient. So for example, if you are bottle feeding and your baby is screaming, crying, and you're out and about, it's a whole hassle to try to like get a bottle made and figure out how you're gonna plan for bottles throughout the day, whatever. If you're breastfeeding, it's 100 times easier to just whip out your boob if you need to than figuring out a whole bottle situation. Okay, this next one I feel like is the biggest pro about breastfeeding, and it's the fact that if you're breastfeeding, you're able to calm your baby anywhere, anytime, pretty much, especially as a newborn. If your baby's going crazy crying, like there are memes about this that you can just like start nursing and it's just like this miracle thing. If your baby is like having a bad day or really sick or teething or any of that, it's crazy because nursing is just like the answer to everything those first few months, and even I would say the whole first year. Nursing is the answer to everything that goes wrong. It's just a lot easier to just be like, oh, I got the boob, let's go. Another pro to breastfeeding is just, and it's kind of cliche, you'll hear this often, but the connection that you have with your little one because you're nursing. I'm sure that there is a connection with bottle feeding, and not to take anything away from that, but there's just no denying that like being one-on-one with you and your baby, and like no one else can do what you're doing for your baby. It's just this like unexplainable connection and bond that you develop between the two. Obviously, I don't have an experience of not breastfeeding, but I just know that those moments where it was just me and him, it's like almost bringing a tear to my eye, but those moments where it's just me and him, it just is special for whatever reason. And another thing too that I found, especially whenever he was a newborn, is like, even now, is that whenever I'm like having a chaotic day and I'm stressed out or I'm like not paying him attention, it's a way that he can come and be like, hey, I need you to calm down, I need you to sit down, I need to sit down and rest, and I just need you for a second. And it's just like the ultimate way for your baby to just kind of check in on you, and for you to check in on your baby, and for you to check in on yourself too. There were times where like just having that quiet where I just had to sit down, I had to not worry about the dishes, not worry about other stuff, and I just got to sit there and just be one-on-one with my little man, and even look at my phone or whatever I wanted to do at the time. It's just like a really nice pause where you can just breathe, and I feel like it's almost like by design, because you definitely need that as a mom. If you're just going, you never stop and take a break, you're coming to a crash landing, let me tell you. And the last pro that I wanted to mention is that no matter how long you breastfeed, it truly feels like such an accomplishment, especially if you're a working mom. Like seriously, hats off to you, because I did it for a little while where I was pumping and nursing, and like it is so hard. It is so hard, and there are so many times along the way that you're gonna think about quitting, and whenever you don't, it's just this accomplishment of like, wow, I really am killing this. And I know for me, my little man is about to be 2 and I'm still nursing. I'm super proud of that. Now that he's getting a little bit older, I'm kind of like, ooh, okay, I don't really talk about it as much, but to be able to nurse this long and to be able to take care of him and keep him healthy and keep myself healthy for this long has been just like something I'm super proud of. And if you're a mom that's been breastfeeding for any amount of time, you should feel so proud of yourself, because nobody knows the mental toughness that it takes to do this for any amount of time. I just also need to add, like, I hope I don't scare you away from breastfeeding in any way, because honestly, it has been the like most beautiful, special, amazing, hard, like the best accomplishment ever. So the very first con that I want to talk about is breastfeeding can be isolating in some ways. So if I'm completely honest, there were just a lot of times, like whenever Ace was a newborn, that I just was by myself a lot because, you know, life goes on where people need to cook dinner and clean, and my husband did a lot, like so much of that whenever Ace was little. But what that meant is that I was by myself, and I, like my personality type, I cannot be by myself. If I could have my family or somebody with me every moment of the day, that I'm happy with that. And so breastfeeding was kind of hard for me in that aspect. Like, you're the one that's up in the middle of the night by yourself. You're the one that is, you know, having to be off breastfeeding while everybody else is hanging out and talking. There were times that I was just like, dang, I wish that I could be with everybody else, or that, you know, I didn't have to answer these cries every single time. And so in that aspect, it was a little bit isolating for sure. And kind of going along with that, it gets to be a lot, and a lot of pressure, and a lot of constant pressure whenever you're the only one that can answer your baby's cries. So this is like, I exclusively breastfed for the first like however long before I went back to work. And so we didn't do bottles. I didn't pump. I mean, I did like here and there, but we didn't do bottles really at all. And then I was also just like super protective over the whole situation, because I've kind of had this like fear about bottles and like me pumping and losing my supply and not being the one to feed him. And so I didn't really let anyone else help. It just created this dependency where, like, if it was anybody but me and he was upset, it was like an even bigger issue. And so it just got easier for me to always be the one to take care of it. And so that just kind of limited a lot. Like, if you're the only person that can soothe your baby or take care of your baby, it's a lot, like to be that 100% of the time. Okay, another con to breastfeeding, and I feel like people don't talk about this that much, but if you're a shy person, if you don't think that you could ever wrap your head around actually nursing in public, then it's going to be a tough journey for you if you want to breastfeed long term. So I would say you either need to get over your shyness of breastfeeding in public, and I say that because that was a big thing for me, or you have to be okay with stepping away from everybody like often to go and nurse. So early on, there were times where like everybody was out to eat and I would go to the car and nurse. Sometimes I still do that, especially now that Ace is older. You can definitely do it, because that was me. I thought it was gonna really freak me out, but it ended up not being anything, especially whenever they're newborns, nobody can even see. But just something to think about. If you're a really shy person, this part is a little bit tough. Another thing that people downplay is the pain, okay? Like, you'll read a lot of times like, oh, breastfeeding shouldn't hurt if you're doing it right or whatever. Even if you're doing it right, it's still gonna hurt. And I have a whole video about this, but like those first few those first few weeks that feel like years, it is super, super, super painful. Another con is if you're a working mom, so if you plan to go back to work, you're not a stay-at-home mom, it can be really difficult to breastfeed and continue to breastfeed. Definitely possible, and people do it all the time, but it's just hard, like having to carry your pump parts and wash them, and that's a whole thing. It can just be really hard because you have to take your pump parts to work, you have to find time to pump at work, and then at the end of the day, whenever you come home and dinner and all of that happens, you gotta wash your pump parts at the end of the day and get ready for the next day. There were times where I went to work and I realized that like when I had washed my pump parts, I had left a part like drying somewhere, and so I wasn't able to pump, or I had to go home. So if you're going back to work, it's just something to think about. If you want to breastfeed long term, that part is kind of hard, not even gonna lie to you. Also, something that I feel like people don't talk about that often, but breastfeeding 100% F's up your boobs. That's so awkward to say, but it really does. Like, I definitely took for granted what I had before. There's so many things that happen, like lopsidedness, like sagginess once you stop breastfeeding. Like, I know that part because I'm in some breastfeeding mom groups, and like there are some really funny memes out there about what happens to your boobs after you get done breastfeeding. But just know, if you're like really attached to your boobs, just know things will change. Another con of breastfeeding is weaning. seriously, what? Like, how do you do this? You don't really have to think about this as much if you start bottle feeding early on. The last con is that it's demanding. It's honestly so demanding. Even still, now that Ace is older, there are times where like he wants to sit down and rest and nurse, and like I don't want to, like I need to get other stuff done. But that kind of goes back to the pro of like, you know, just the little check-ins and the little moments whenever you don't want to rest. I just want to put information out there so that you guys can figure out what you think is going to be best for you. Okay, so those are my pros and cons, and I just want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do differently next time. I was obsessed with figuring everything out and just like trying to do everything perfectly. And so whenever my husband stepped in to try to help, I was just like, no, like I have to learn how to do this. I have to do this perfectly. If you feed him with a bottle, then my supply is going to drop. And if you feed him with a bottle, he could get confused and not want to nurse anymore. And it was just all these different things that were definitely fear-based and not necessarily realistic that caused a lot of the cons that I listed before. So for example, I think for the next baby that we have, whenever that is, hopefully one day, I do want to introduce a bottle a little bit earlier. I think that because we did it so much later and because I didn't really pump or do anything like that early on, it made it a lot more difficult for Ace to be soothed by someone else. And so I think for our next baby, my husband and I have talked about this, about just like giving him a lot bigger of a role and allowing him to do some of the stuff that he wanted to do. I almost feel like I kept him from having that relationship early on whenever Ace was so little, because I just like was so obsessed with figuring out breastfeeding and making sure I was doing everything correctly. And so that's definitely something different that we're going to do for baby number 2. I think also for baby number 2, I am not going to be so obsessed about exclusively breastfeeding. With Ace, whenever he turned, I think it was like 8 months, maybe I think it was 8 months, my supply dropped because I was working like almost 12 hours a day, and my supply dropped and we had to go to formula. And once we went to formula, I was like, dang, like I kind of wish I would have done this earlier, just at times, because it just takes the pressure off. Like, you know, you don't have to have a freezer full of milk. You can just give your baby formula that day. And if you introduce some of that stuff early on, from what I hear, it's a lot easier for your baby to adjust. And so I think because I was so obsessed with like exclusively breastfeeding and me just doing everything, it caused Ace to like not be so, what's the word, like resilient, I guess, like he did adaptable, I don't know the word, but it just made like situations that weren't that serious a lot more serious and stressful for me, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like can anybody else watch him, because I'm the only one that can soothe him. And even still to this day, I'm like a little bit controlling whenever it comes to that type of stuff. Baby number 2, definitely gonna try to be a little bit more hands-off, not so obsessed with exclusively breastfeeding, not so obsessed with like doing everything perfectly. So if you are on the fence about breastfeeding, please don't let my cons like sway you to not do it, because you'll be amazed that like whenever your baby is born, obviously everything changes. Like your mentality changes, your perspective, your focus, everything is just different. And so how you feel right now, like watching this video, if you're a mom to be, is gonna be a lot different than how you actually feel whenever your baby's here. I'll tell you guys, like I was kind of shy. I mean, I'm still shy. And whenever he was born, like and the only thing that mattered was just soothing him and like making sure that he was healthy and happy and fed, and that's just what matters. So if you're on the fence, please don't change your mind because it's something that I said. But I hope that you guys just do your research and figure out what you think is going to be best for you and your family. And I hope it's great. I hope you guys have a great experience. So anyway, make sure you guys subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video.